There is one single solitary swear word in this story. It's not where you think. Fernando Juan Tenku Jones was expecting a cat. His friend on the colony world had said they were sending one that somebody'd left behind. Poor thing. And Fern couldn't wait to give it a good home. He'd already cat-proofed his quarters as best he could. Fragile things were put away. His reading lamp was secured to the bedside table, and he'd grabbed a few cardboard boxes from the recycle stash that would make good hidey holes. A litter box should be available somewhere in this space station's commerce sector. He'd been here before. He could check after the drop-off. As much as he would have liked to get that set up first, he wasn't in charge of the schedule. His Frillian crewmates were curious about the companion animal that the captain was allowing him to bring on board. He'd spent the last half of the trip telling them every story about cats he could think of. Each of them rippled their frills in patient disinterest, but he didn't mind. They'd be won over by the adorable kitty soon enough. When the ship docked at their usual berth, Fern did his part in helping unload the usual shipment. The specialty maintenance shop here always ordered the same stuff at this time of the rotation. Everything was normal. But then Fern got to dash off to meet another ship, and he was more excited than he'd been in a long time. He called ahead and was told to meet at the cargo bay door. When he arrived, he saw that this ship was unloading boxes as well. He didn't see any logos anywhere, and the boxes weren't even all the same kind. Plus, the crew wasn't wearing uniforms. Looks like one of those freelance setups, he thought while he patiently waited at a distance. That always sounded like such an unreliable way to make a living. But at least they get to travel to interesting places, where there are cats. When the crew finished handing the motley assortment of boxes off to a motley assortment of customers, the one with the tablet waved him over. This was a cute little lizard who probably wouldn't want to be described that way. As yellow as a very serious banana. She called into the ship for somebody else to come out, and Fern was delighted to see another human carrying a cat-sized cage. "Hello," the other human said, waving her free hand. "I have something important to tell you about your new friend here." Fern was immediately worried. Is it injured or pregnant? His captain had approved a single animal, not a litter. "Thankfully, no," she replied, setting down the cage with the front turned away from him. "First of all, he's perfectly healthy and perfectly tame, and he's been fixed. But most importantly, his stink gland has been removed." His what? Fern thought of his aunt's cat who had stunk up the house by scent-marking the walls. "Wasn't that just pee, not a gland?" "Congratulations," the other human said. "You are the proud owner of a non-spraying skunk." "A what?" Fern said on reflex, processing her words. She lifted the cage and turned it so he could see inside. "This is the friendliest little snuggle buddy, and he likes being brushed." Fern stared. A very fluffy skunk stared back. While most of his brain was still circling in shock, the thought surfaced that the animal really did seem tame, not threatening to spray even though its gland had been removed. "Theoretically," he asked. "You're sure it's completely distinct?" "Yes." The other human nodded. "Our med scanner is top-notch. And I spent a lot of time with him on the trip here. I'm certain he was hand-raised as a pet. No idea how the poor guy ended up in the middle of nowhere, but he more than deserves a loving home. Think you can give him that?" Fern's heart twinged, and he shook himself. "Yes, absolutely." "Did he come with a name?" The other human smiled. "Nope. That's up to you. I've been calling him Fluffy, but that's just a placeholder." "Seems pretty accurate," Fern said, gazing through the bars. The yellow lizard stepped forward with the digital paperwork. Fern signed for the skunk, his thoughts in a whirl. "If you're already set up with cat food, good news, skunks will eat that," the other human told him. "They're omnivores, so this guy will eat a lot of the same stuff you do. Just try to keep it as close to nature as you can out in space, plain and not overly processed. He'll love peanut butter and chicken eggs if you can get them. Oh, and keep him away from the usual list of crazy human toxic foods. No chocolate, onions, garlic, or caffeine. Or hot peppers, though that's more unpleasant than poisonous for him." "Right," Fern said, handing the tablet back. "Good to know, thank you." "Sure thing. I hope you guys have a long and happy life together." She presented him with the cage and gave his uniform a look. Merchant ship, right? "Talented toolmakers of Frillian pride," Fern recited automatically as he accepted the armload of skunk. "Well, this guy's glad to have you," the other human said. The lizard was already walking back into the ship. "We have to rush off to another delivery, but good luck. Skunks can get into places they shouldn't, and claw things open that a cat wouldn't be able to, so keep him away from the engine room. Got it! Fern waved goodbye as the other human trotted back onto her ship. While the bay doors closed, Fern took careful steps back toward his own. He expected his crewmates to react in alarm at the news that his cat was a skunk. But he'd forgotten that they were unfamiliar with Earth animals. "If it can't make that smell, and it isn't going to bite anyone, then I don't see a problem," the captain said. "Just keep it in your quarters while it gets settled in. You can bring it out under supervision later." "It really is as fluffy as you said," remarked the engineer. "What does it eat?" asked the pilot. Fern replied, "A lot of the same things I do." "That's convenient," the pilot said. The others agreed. And that was that. Fern took the skunk into his quarters, let it waddle around and sniff everything, then fed it a messy plate of cat food. He put a folded hand towel in the cage and gently stuffed the skunk back in so he could run off to buy a litter box without worrying about what it would do while he was gone. He splurged on a fancy litter box with a covered top and an auto scooper designed for ship's cats. When he set it up and opened the cage, the skunk went right for it, which was a relief. Probably a relief for him too, Fern thought. He's been in that cage a while. The captain announced that they were taking off. Fern settled down to socialize with his new pet, confident that he wouldn't be needed for a while yet. Their route was predictable after all, and this next part involved a lot of empty space before they reached the warehouse. A lot of empty space and pirates. Human ones according to the intercom, which just made the whole thing more insulting. This was not the taste of home he'd been missing. The captain's announcement held a lot of profanity, and Fern could see why. It was bad enough to be shaken down when they had cargo they could be reimbursed for, but right now their hold was empty, and the pirates wouldn't accept that. "They'll want our own tools," Fern thought, looking around his quarters. "And food and fuel and—" His gaze fell on the skunk nosing about his bookshelf. And fuck them. He lunged for the intercom button. "Captain, if you're sure they're human, I have an idea." Several minutes later, the pirate ship locked onto the merchant vessel and clamped an adapter over the airlock. Pirates gathered, ready to board, armed with guns and knives and vicious grins. Those grins evaporated when the first pirate looked through the airlock porthole at what waited for them on the other side. One lone human wearing a breather helmet and carrying a fluffy, agitated skunk. The pirates detached immediately and took off with enough thrust to rock the ship. The pilot got the merchant vessel back on course, while the captain sang praises over the intercom, and Fern brought Fluffy the fearsome back to his room for some well-earned brushing. The next time that particular merchant ship passed through the area, it had a large emblem of a skunk pasted next to the company logo.